Hey, it's Huck. And I just wanted to share some random thoughts today on the historic rulings this past week by the Supreme Court of the United States. First, the Affordable Care Act. There's no controversy here. The only controversy was that the court felt compelled to hear the case to begin with, as the legal argument for the plaintiffs was about as silly and underwhelming as one finds in a legal dispute. Even the standing of those bringing forward the lawsuit was somewhat tainted. Still, at least 4 justices on the court had to deem the case worthy of hearing. In light of the eventual 6-3 ruling upholding subsidies on the federal exchanges, it's worth exploring who, among those 6, sought to hear the case only to rule against it. Was it Kennedy, who gave such a scathing dissent of the Affordable Care Act a few years earlier when the court ruled 5-4 upholding the law's constitutionality, allowing the individual mandate, and declaring that the penalties for non-compliance was a tax? Or was it Roberts, who again voted with the 4 liberal members of the court to uphold the Affordable Care Act and its provisions? The answer to that, I believe, becomes clearer when you read Chief Justice Roberts' complete ruling. Roberts did not just uphold the legality of the subsidies paid on the federal exchange. That was a given. The whole argument was over whether 6 words in one supplemental portion of the law, and Roberts correctly deemed that those 6 words, though they excluded the words federal exchange, could not in and of themselves undermine and make immaterial the overwhelming evidence that both state and federal exchanges were meant to receive subsidies. This evidence included virtually everyone who voted affirmatively for the bill making it law, the senators and staffers writing the bill itself, even Republicans who opposed the bill, and the independent Congressional Budget Office scoring the costs and savings of the bill. Not to mention that in the main explanatory portion of the bill, it was made clear that federal exchanges were considered equal to state exchanges, merely an alternative for states not setting up their own exchange, and not a coercive threat to states failing to do so. But Roberts and the voting majority actually had several options at their disposal to uphold this rather elementary legal position. They chose the most expansive argument, that the 6 words were not at all ambiguous, at the whim of whoever sat in the Oval Office, to change through manipulation of IRS interpretation in future years. Rather, Roberts correctly wrote that the context of the entire bill, its clear and defined purpose and structure, was incompatible with the plaintiff's argument. No ambiguity, no wiggle room for other interpretation. Now, many Obamacare supporters, not to mention the 6.5 million Americans whose subsidies were at risk in this case, feared the court might just try to pull a fast one. Unlike the original case before them a few years ago, on which the very constitutionality of the law itself was at stake, this case provided conservatives on the court with a convenient out. Agree that the wording was ambiguous, at the discretion of the IRS to interpret. Or worse, ambiguous enough to strike subsidies on the federal exchange until such time as Congress got around to crafting and passing a simple single-sentence correction. Here's where it gets really interesting. And to truly appreciate this, we first have to understand that Republicans never have, and likely never will pursue, any health care reform that requires taxation on any level or regulation of businesses at any level. Let me repeat this, because Republicans have been playing it both ways for 50 years now, and the truth is something people don't seem to understand or don't want to admit. The only times in history the Republican Party has ever, I said ever, even discussed any kind of health care insurance policy is when they have opposed plans pushed by Democrats. Republicans have never agreed on any true health care plan of their own. The only times they've ever come up with one is when they were backed in a corner and needed something to counter the much more liberal, more costly, and more popular Democratic plans. My video, Obamacare, Why Republicans Hate It, gives you the history of how Republicans, in desperation, submitted less comprehensive plans of their own, always to counter a better Democratic plan in the works. And even in each of these cases, Republicans could never, ever reach agreement on their own plan. And so they never moved forward with any of them. Most of them never got out of committee. We've heard for 5 years now how Republicans plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. But even after passage of the Affordable Care Act, Republicans have never been able to get their act together and submit a proposal. Not in 5 years. And the reason is simple. They don't favor anything that raises taxes, and health care coverage is expensive. To hold down costs also requires strict government regulation of drugs, equipment, services. And we know how conservatives feel about government regulation. No. The big glaring truth is that Republicans never have and show no signs of ever in the foreseeable future prioritizing health care solutions for Americans. Isn't going to happen. That means that Scott Walker and Jeb Bush, campaigning all around the country on a promise to repeal and replace Obamacare, is just one big fucking lie. Period. Not only are Republicans opposed to the very means necessary to resolving the high cost of and poor access to health care, taxes and regulation, they are also unwilling to undergo the kind of torturous political process that passing such legislation requires. Don't forget, there was a purge of how many Democrats in the House and Senate, some of whom even chose not to run again after they voted for the Affordable Care Act. When Obama decided in 2009 that he was going to prioritize health care rather than some other issue, like climate change or immigration, both at the time much easier targets, he did so and was barely able to steer the process to its completion. But he did so due to one thing Republicans will never have going for them. He had unanimous support among Democrats that access to affordable health care was a priority. Republicans have never had it anywhere near their wish list. It is much easier for them to rail against those tax and spend, regulation crazy Democrats and use that criticism to energize their Tea Party nut base than to give one iota of thought or compassion to those suffering from their lack of access to affordable health care. Roberts clearly understood that sending this provision back to Congress would put his Republican brethren in an impossible position. After crusading the past 5 years against Obamacare, 67 votes in Congress to repeal it, their own lawsuit still working its way through the courts, they could not now vote to correct the law so that subsidies could continue. And on the other hand, if the court had thrown it back into their hands, if they chose to let the subsidies die, there would be, well, at first, the backlash of 6.5 million voters, 4.5 million of them, by the way, in Republican districts, followed by the growing millions of others nationwide as Obamacare withered on the vine of bankrupted insurance companies nationwide. Roberts saved the Republican Party, quite possibly, from their own demise. I believe he wanted this case for that reason. And to show their gratitude, every conservative in the country is blasting Roberts. And after Kennedy's ruling the next day on legalizing gay marriage nationwide, some of the most vocal conservative idiots are arguing that the High Court's decision should be ignored in the name of religious liberty, or worse, that the court should be disbanded. Amazing how any of these folks can be taken seriously. When your basis is devoid of principle, that they are ready to abandon the very Constitution they claim to hold so dear, you know your party has some very fundamental problems. Yet the reality is these are the folks Republicans need to get elected. Remember that next time you go to vote. I'm Huck. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again real soon.